Story we're following right now, some breaking news from Bridgeport. We're late this afternoon. A judge ruled Connecticut's biggest city will need to hold a brand new Democratic primary.
And all of this is stemming from concerns over absentee ballot abuse. That was all caught on camera. Channel 3 New Haven Bureau Chief Matt McFarland covered the entire case. He is joining us now live with the latest. Matt.
Well, Aaron and Mark, no surprise. There are plenty of questions of how this is all going to work out now, especially because we are less than a week away to Election Day. But in his 37-page ruling, Judge William Clark said that the evidence was overwhelming and that the number of ballots which were mishandled was so large that it puts Bridgeport's Democratic primary in serious doubt and that the court is unable to determine the legitimate results of the primary. Now, Democratic challenger John Gomes filed a lawsuit back in September seeking a new primary. That's because Mayor Joe Ganim beat Gomes by 251 votes, thanks in large part to taking the absentee ballots by a roughly 2-to-1 margin. But in the days after the primary, video surfaced showing Wanda Jeter Pataki, a City Hall employee and Ganim supporter, stuffing a number of envelopes into the absentee ballot drop box on multiple occasions, and it just wasn't her. In fact, Anita Martinez, who's running for city council on Ganim's ticket, was also caught on video. But when put on the witness stand and questioned about what they were doing, both women pled the theft. When it comes to absentee ballots here in Connecticut, there are specific rules. In fact, you can only handle someone else's ballot if you're a family member, a caregiver, or a designee.
Thanks for staying with us here on The Real Story. Joining me now to talk about upcoming voting here in Connecticut, Secretary of the State, Stephanie Thomas. Stephanie, thank you as always for joining us.
Thank you for having me as always.
So it's always really busy in your office, and It's stayed really busy even since our last elections in November. But in just a few days, we're going to see a primary redo in Bridgeport. So after watching surveillance video of alleged ballot fraud, the judge ruled to throw out the results of September's primary. This has all been pretty unprecedented to deal with, right?
For me, certainly, since this is my first year in the role. But there have been court orders in the past, but not in this specific type of situation. So, but what I've said to everyone, I'm so glad there was that footage so the judge could make a very firm ruling versus it just languishing for years.
And on that note, you know, we've spoken at length about this before. Your administration all along has said that election security is, of course, so important, but you've been pretty adamant that election fraud and mistakes do happen, but it's more important to see how you react and what happens afterward if it's caught, like with that surveillance footage. So why has that been your focus, more on the response?
Well, there always is a small amount of fraud, right? And I think what people forget, and they point to all these cases, it's like, yes, it was caught. So, you know, if you look at any study over any period of time, it's like 0.0000001% of cases. So what I like to do, instead of focusing on these big headlines, is look at what type of incident occurred and try to close gaps in the system. So, you know, I try to work the problem, and that's what we're trying to do in Bridgeport right now.
And let's get into some of the basics of what's happening. So specifically, what will be happening next week with the primary redo and then beyond that?
So, as you know, the court case centered around the absentee ballot footage, but the new primary, of course, will involve absentee ballots, but also regular election day voting, so people can go to their polling place from 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. So we've had 2 election monitors in the town clerk's office every single day, and they've been doing many different things to like eat away at different aspects of the problems that come to their attention.
Gotcha. And what role do these election monitors and the registrars play in this process?
So town clerks handle absentee ballots, registrars handle election day voting. So the election monitors are in the town clerk's office and they play a lot of different roles. They make sure the local staff are following procedures to the letter of the law. If they see places where procedure can be improved, they instruct them and give them best practice training. There's a new town clerk in Bridgeport. A lot of people don't realize that was just elected in November. So they've been training him as well.
Right.
And then when people come in and ask questions, they're there as a voice for community members to give them answers, make sure people picking up absentee ballots understand the law, and on and on and on.
And if someone is concerned or feel like they see something that maybe shouldn't be going on, what should they know? Who should they talk to? Is it those election monitors?
Sure. If they just have a question like, is this okay? Is that okay? They can certainly call the town clerk's office and ask for one of the election monitors. They could also call the Secretary of the State's office or check our website. If they know something was done illegal, that should go to the State Elections Enforcement Commission, SEEK.
Okay.
And you can Google that. There's a hotline number, etc. So if you know something is illegal, you have to report that. Okay. Our office has no investigatory powers.
Right. I know that was kind of a whole debate, especially when this first started. And as we've both said, this started because of those absentee ballots. But with a special election, we know it's a lot more common for people to vote that way, to apply for absentee ballots. And Bridgeport has had a record number of applications for absentees this time around. How does Connecticut keep absentee ballots and absentee voting secure?
You know, we have really strict laws, and that's why I always say we need the public's help, because we can't investigate something unless it's reported. If it's reported, it goes to the investigation process that SEEK handles. Then we have an opportunity to adjudicate these specific instances. I keep talking about, over the years, some of the same people have been named in some of these cases. So I feel like something has to happen there. Otherwise, the process is very tight, and our monitors are there, again, to make sure the law is being followed. So we are doing everything we can. Anytime something comes to our attention, we try to address it in real time. Like a form came up and we realized people might not understand what they're signing. It's a special form if you need a duplicate ballot because you spilled coffee on yours or something.
Gotcha.
But it was like a 10-point font. I couldn't even read it. So within a couple of hours, we recreated the form, much larger font with a big label on it saying, if you sign this, it means X. Just little things can help tweak the process.
Right. Absolutely. And when it comes to absentee ballots this year, all Connecticut voters will be filling out a ballot question about whether or not they want no excuse absentee ballot voting in elections. This is something you've supported before. Do you still think that this is a good move and right for Connecticut?
I think it is. What I try to remind people, we think in these big terms, so no excuse absentee ballots. I think that 33, 35 other states already have this, have had it. But there's probably 12, 15, 20 different ways to do it. So people tend to speak like it's a monolith, but we can create a program that makes sense for us here. In some states, for example, their program, they created it so that the state would send out absentee ballot applications, so political parties and candidates cannot. And that's how they thought it was better to make it more secure. Other states handle it in different ways. So I think people should just think about if it's a good idea for the constitutional amendment that'll be on the ballot in November, and then work with their legislative delegation to figure out what system works best for Connecticut.
Sort of similar to what we saw with early voting last year.
Correct.
The constitutional amendment, the ballot question passed, but then the legislative session was determining how to actually implement it. Because as people were saying, so many states have a different number of days in deciding what's best for
I've been doing a lot of research already. I started late last year, just so if it does pass, we're not starting late. And I came across data, there's one state that accepts it by fax.
Wow.
And I just thought, oh, that's interesting. I don't think we would do that, but, for states where geography is an issue and people can't easily get from place to place.
Right.
So I thought that was interesting, but it just tells you it's a good example of how many different ways there are to do these things.
Right. And before we move on from Bridgeport, is there anything else you feel you or your office have learned from this whole situation? Any conversations or changes you would like to see happen going forward?
Sure. I mean, we'll definitely be putting forth a legislative package centered around tweaks that could make the absentee ballot current process we have more secure, like closing the window for applications. Like right now, I could request an application for an election in November. I don't think that makes sense because who knows if they can vote by absentee ballot yet in November. So little things like that we'll definitely propose. And what I have learned is what I learned ever since I took this job. Most people started voting at a young age. They don't realize laws change over time, and no one studies this. So people are legitimately confused about what is and isn't allowed. Voters, I'm talking about. So the more we can do to educate the public about election procedures, I think the better off we all will be.
And with voters, we did see low turnout back in November as all of this was shaking out in Connecticut's biggest city. Voters told us they felt confused and cheated and maybe concerned their vote didn't even count. What do you say to those voters, especially ahead of next week, just a few days away from this primary redo?
I mean, based on the footage, right, they have a right to be angry and bitter, right? I would be like, what? But your vote always counts. It's even if you don't vote, that counts. You know, they said at the time when the case first broke that if more people had voted in person, it wouldn't have mattered that we don't know how many envelopes were illegally deposited in the drop box. But if that number was 50 or 100, whatever it was, if 100 more people had voted in person, it would not have been, we would have still had to adjudicate that situation, but it wouldn't have mattered with the results. So I just remind people, your vote always counts, even if you're not casting it.
So now let's talk about all of us heading back to the polls for the next primary, the